With the latest Division 2 update, a new rogue-lite game mode was released, Descent, which is available for free as part of Season 1. This game mode sees agents working their way through a simulation, completing loops and killing arena bosses with infinite scaling and progression until they can't handle it anymore. I played a lot of Descent in the PTS, with my highest floor reached being 47, and since go live I've taken the current Speedrun world record for killing Nemesis at 28 minutes and 45 seconds. This mode can be a lot of fun, but since it hit live I've seen a huge number of complaints about difficulty. In this video I'll share the tips and tricks I've picked up throughout my time spent in Descent thus far to equip you with the information you need to absolutely decimate this game mode and get to those seemingly impossibly high floors. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel out massively and helps my video reach and help more people like you. With that said, let's get into it. So before we get into the meat and bones of how best to tackle Descent, we're going to need to discuss some prerequisites. Firstly, rather obviously the methods I'm going to describe aren't the only way to play Descent. You may find that something works better for you, and that's fine. This is just the strats myself and teammates have developed throughout our time spent in the mode. Next, I know that RNG is a major factor in this game mode. I'll note a couple of strategies you can use to mitigate some of the RNG, but you'll never be able to fully mitigate it. If you have terrible luck at the start, that run may just not be the run you high floor on, and again, that's fine. Just make the best of what you're given and pray that things take a turn for the better. Finally, this video assumes you already know the core mechanics of the mode. I won't be covering that here. If you're not comfortable with how the mode works, I'd suggest running a couple of short attempts and reviewing the patch notes, then revisiting this video. To structure this video, I'm going to break it down into 4 sections: strategy, builds, playstyle, and additional tips. If you're already comfortable with a particular element, I've timestamped each section, so feel free to skip to the one you want to learn. Firstly, we'll cover strategy. This won't be a very long or complex segment due to the game mode's repetitive nature, but let's take a look at different loops and how we want to approach them. Firstly, loop 1. You've just booted into the game mode and it's time to pick your first weapon or skill. We'll cover ideal weapons off in the build portion of this video, but as far as skills go, I really wouldn't recommend leaning into skill builds too heavily. If you get Revive, Hive or Foam Chem in your first selection, pick that, but if not, I'd recommend just skipping for the extra credits. For the first 3 loops, we're going to put a slightly odd sounding strategy in place. We're going to stick to at most 1 reroll per talent box. If you don't get something useful after the first reroll, just skip it for the credits. The reason we're going to be limiting rerolls is that these can be a huge credit sink, and early on those credits are really needed. In addition to limiting rerolls, you're going to want to pick higher difficulty rooms where possible. This will buy you additional time to gear up for the Nemesis encounter. So that's your early floor strategy. You'll progress through your first loops and hopefully you'll have hit some good talent RNG throughout. Don't worry if not though, we're still in very early days so you can press on regardless. After each loop in these early stages, your absolute priority should be buying offensive talent slot +3 from the pre-loop vendor. Extra defensive or utility slots won't really do anything for you as the pool of desirable talents is slim, but these offensive slots are must-haves. Once you've got +3, focus on medkit capacity, then ammo capacity. We've now done our early loops, so what are we going to do from loop 3 to Nemesis? Well, we're going to employ a very similar, but slightly more lenient strategy, as it's pretty important that you at least get some desirable talents from these loops. We're still limiting the number of rerolls we can do, but we're increasing it to 2. Like the first reroll limiting, if you don't get a desirable talent after 2 rerolls, just skip. For these later loops, you should also massively limit which buffs you're buying from the pre-loop station. What I mean by this is don't spend 3,000 credits on extra grenades if you haven't found yourself running out in previous loops, and so on. For these pre-Nemesis loops, credits are the most important factor as these ultimately determine your build. On the note of Nemesis, we're now done with all of the loops leading into that encounter, so it's time to look at strategy for the fight. Most of this will be covered off in the playstyle portion of the video, but fundamentally the strategy will be to bum rush Nemesis as hard as you possibly can. Prior to the encounter, you should buy high velocity rounds, and that should enable a stagger onto Nemesis, buying precious time to gun them down. With Nemesis hopefully dead, you're now moving into what I call the endgame of Descent. This is the infinite slog that we all became so well acquainted with in the PTS. Post Nemesis, in this endgame you can buy whatever you want, whenever you want. At this point, credits are pretty plentiful, so you really shouldn't struggle with economy. This is the stage where you should really be working on perfecting your build. Did I say builds? Well, I guess it's time to talk about that. I appreciate this may be a point of contention due to the aforementioned RNG, but what we'll do here is start at the full build we want to be working towards, then work backwards. This means that you shouldn't be infinitely re-rolling and wasting credits to get these talents off the bat, but it would be good to snap them up at the earliest opportunity. A wish list of sorts. Firstly, weapons. Weapon archetype is more important than most people think within the game mode, as it doesn't just dictate time to kill, it also dictates ammo economy and ability to sustain gunfire, which genuinely can be the difference between life and death. With this in mind, my recommendation is to find yourself a good shotgun. I personally found the most success with Super 90, M870 and SASG, and a good LMG. Regarding LMG, the L86 LSW is a very good option for this, especially if you secure the ideal exotic talent, Bullet Hell. The purpose of picking these archetypes is that your shotgun will one-shot basically anything as long as you're getting a semi-steady feed of desirable talents, and your LMG will save you at long range whilst remaining incredibly ammo efficient. Finally, don't neglect the pistol. If you get the option to secure yourself a good pistol, do it. This can really save you in a pinch if you need it. Next, let's think about exotic talents. I mentioned there that you want the Bullet Hell talent, and that is undeniably the strongest talent in the game mode. But acquiring that still leaves us with 2 exotic slots. My recommendation for these slots would be the Diamondback talent and the Chameleon talent. In later floors, both of these talents will give you much more than they appear to at face value. For example, the Diamondback talent will guarantee nearly 100% uptime of talents like Clutch, which will be our main source of survivability. So we've now got our guns, and we know what we're picking if we luck out on the exotic station. But what about the choice between extra damage or armor after each arena? Well, this is easy. Every single person I know who's hit high floors has picked exclusively blue cores. We'll talk about why this works so well later, but in short, it's a waste to pick anything other than blue. The final part of the build puzzle is arguably the most confusing: talents. I'm going to make this as simple as I can though, by first listing the talents you want by category, then the ideal order you should be looking for them in. The target talents you'll want in each category are as follows. You'll notice that 2 of these lists don't contain all 6 talents. That's because there are less than 6 viable talents in those slots, so you can just put whatever filler talents you desire in there. For offensive talents, the talents you want are Concussion, Vigilance, Unhinged, Strained, Precise, and Allegro. For defensive, you want Adrenaline Rush, Clutch, Preservation, and Insulated. Finally, for utility, you want Optimized, Steady-handed, and Opportunistic. So there are our talents. Let's look at how we should ideally acquire them. For this, I'm going to dig deep into my inner YouTuber and put together a tier list. You can refer back to this when running to find the best option given your selection. In S tier, we have Concussion, Optimized, Preservation, and Unhinged. The reason Unhinged sits here is it will be our primary source of all weapon damage, which means that we can pick blue cores at the end of each arena without missing out. In A tier, we have Vigilance, Allegro, Clutch, Adrenaline Rush, and Opportunistic. These are talents which are really nice to have, but you could acquire them in later game without feeling it too much. In the final tier, the B tier, we have the remaining talents: Strained, Precise, and Steady-handed. So that's that. You now know what strategies to employ as you progress, and you know how to effectively build craft. Next, let's look at playstyle. This isn't going to be a particularly long section because it basically boils down to a single point: push hard. Having flicked through Twitch recently, I noticed that a lot of people are playing Descent from cover and letting things come to them. That playstyle is all well and good in the bigger rooms with loads of cover and funnel points, but when you move into a smaller room, it just won't work. You can and will be flanked, pushed from all directions, and overwhelmed. Since we know where enemies will be spawning, playing aggressively is actually really easy in this game mode. In a group, you can position one player over each spawn and just kill them when the door opens. If you're solo, I'd recommend camping one door, blitzing it as it spawns, and then running to the remaining enemies. Whilst it seems like a riskier strat, this is actually in my opinion a hell of a lot easier than staying back and funneling, not to mention that you'll clear loops much faster. This strat leaks into Nemesis too. You'll want to push, although not quite as hard as you'll be pushing in general ad rooms, to overwhelm the Nemesis and burn them to the ground. Staying back means you'll constantly be trying to stay alive, which will reduce the amount of time you have to deal damage. The final tip I have in regard to playstyle is don't be afraid to use your pistol. Pistols do surprisingly high damage with the right build in this mode, and due to infinite ammo they can be very useful. To demonstrate how strong they are, in the PTS myself and a teammate ran at least 10 floors between 30 and 40 with only pistols. They're great. I said that the playstyle section would be brief, and I wasn't lying. That's playstyle totally covered off. As a final bonus category, let's recognise that most of this game mode comes down to RNG, and see how we can limit the amount of RNG and subsequent margin for shafting that we face. Firstly, the single biggest factor. Go to the NSA station and pick up the extra talent. This will mean that every time you're asked to select a talent within Descent, there's a fourth option. You're entitled to spend your hard-earned NSA credits how you like, but personally I try to make this one of, if not the first thing you buy. It makes such a huge difference. Next, room selection is a good way to minimise RNG. Pick and choose which you're aiming for carefully based on what you already have. For instance, if you have 6 offensive talents already, you shouldn't go for a triple red room, and so on. Finally, don't be scared to skip. So far from my testing, enemy scaling only increases loop by loop. What this means is if you can clear the first room of a loop with your setup, you can clear the entire loop. Thus you shouldn't feel pressured into re-rolling and claiming bad talents. You theoretically have 4 talent selections with your current setup to get what you want before the difficulty increases. So if there's a bad selection, just hit the skip button and get some credits back. So that about sums it up for my guide on tackling the Descent game mode in the Division 2. I hope you enjoyed, and good luck out there. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I try to read every comment. Thanks for watching. Battle of the chem launchers right now. Oh my god. Oh my god. Sub 30. Let's go.